And now to move on with our next esteemed guest speaker. He is the Member of Parliament for Bruce in the House of Representatives, representing the southeastern suburbs of Melbourne, including Dandenong, and he's also a member of Australian Labor Party and is Deputy Chair of the Australian Parliament's Foreign Affairs, an aid subcommittee which held a public hearing on Myanmar's issues in April 2021. And he also condemns the military coup and has been standing in solidarity with us Myanmar people. And may I invite Mr. Julian Hill.
စကားပြောကြပြသွားပါတော့ဝန်ကြီးဦးအောင်မျိုးမင်းကိုကျေးဇူးထူးပဲတင်ရှိပါတယ်ရှင်။နောက်ထပ်စကားပြောကြပြသွားမှာတော့တန်တရွန်ပါဝင် Melbourne မြို့အရှိတောင်ပိုင်းဆင်ချေပုံကိုစားပြုတဲ့ Bruce အတွက်အောက်လွှတ်တော်ကိုစားပြုပါလီမန်အမတ် Julian Hill ပဲဖြစ်ပါတယ်ရှင်။သူက Australia ပါတီရဲ့ဖွဲ့ဝင်တူဖြစ်ပြီးတော့ April လကမြန်မာနိုင်ငံရေးကိစ္စများအားလူထုကြားနာမှုပြုလုပ်ခဲ့တဲ့Australia Parliament နိုင်ငံသားရေးနဲ့အကူအညီပေးရေး Subcommittee ရဲ့ဒုတိယဥက္ကဋ္ဌလည်းဖြစ်ပါတယ်ရှင်။စကားပြောကြပေးမယ် Australia အလုပ်သမားပါတီဝင် Mr. Julian Hill ကိုဖိတ်ခေါ်လိုပါတယ်ရှင်။
Thank you so much for the invitation to share a few words with you today, and congratulations to the CRPH and the NUG Support Committee and Organising Group, and indeed I'd also like to acknowledge the ministers who've just spoken, as well as the traditional owners of the land on which we meet here in Australia. I'm on the lands of the Bunurong and the Wurundjeri people and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. The work that you are doing in continuing to speak up for human rights and democracy really matters. It's not easy, both for people outside the country to continue that energy, but also, of course, for those brave people inside Myanmar who are standing up for those universal human rights, those basic rights to dignity, freedom, space in civil society, and the ability to vote and choose the government. Federal Labor stands with you. These are our values, and they're values which we're fighting for together. The Tatmadaw have to be held to account. Even before the coup, the Tatmadaw stand accused of war crimes and crimes against humanity, the gravest of crimes, as the United Nations report found conclusive evidence of. But the international community has a collective responsibility to not stand by and let accusations of these serious crimes go unaddressed. This is both, I believe, a moral responsibility for those of us who believe and support the concepts of human rights, but also a legal responsibility in international law. But even before the coup, the persecution of the Rohingya, for example, is the subject of the ongoing international criminal court processes. The indictment was chilling 2 years ago: mass killing, sexual and gender violence, and other atrocities. The jurisdiction, of course, at that point was contested, but the court found that it does have jurisdiction to hear these claims, given some of the events happened in Bangladesh. But I want to congratulate the National Unity Government on your step in August this year, your decision to sign up to the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court. Australia, of course, some time ago imposed targeted financial sanctions and travel bans against 5 Myanmar military officers from the Tatmadaw, deemed responsible for human rights violations in Rakhine State. This is a bipartisan position, to be fair, of both the Australian government and Federal Labor as the opposition, that those responsible for these horrific crimes must be held to account. And Australian diplomats must continue to work internationally to that end, including through the United Nations and the Human Rights Committee, with our international partners and the entire global community. Of course, sadly, the work of our diplomats has been hampered in the 9th year of this government. Continual cuts to Australia's Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade make it all the harder for them to continue their important work, both to spend enough time engaging with the diaspora here, with the National Unity Government, CRPH, but also to continue that important work internationally. But there's also evidence that atrocities have continued to be committed during and since the coup this year. Now, the coup has failed in the sense that the Tatmadaw have not achieved their objectives. They're not in control of the country, but there is a humanitarian disaster and an economic disaster, and still the ongoing risk of an outbreak of a deteriorating civil war and urban conflict. Now, I'm frustrated with the Australian government's weak, reactive response. You mentioned in your kind introduction the parliamentary inquiry, which I know many people participated in from the diaspora right across the country, participated in between April and June this year. What we heard through that parliamentary inquiry was a consistent theme, both from citizens of Australia, from people of Myanmarese origin, academics, aid groups, frustration and anger at the government's, the Morrison government's slow, reactive and inadequate response at every step. This was the constant theme of the evidence we received. There's been no sense of urgency from this government. Indeed, in March, the Foreign Minister, Marise Payne, told the Senate that she was considering sanctions in response to the coup. In April, the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade told the Parliament through our inquiry that the Minister was still considering sanctions. In May, the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade then told us that the Minister had decided not to implement sanctions of any kind in response to the coup. Now, key individuals, and particularly the Tatmadaw-linked entities, the big multi-billion-dollar commercial conglomerates, should be, I believe, the subject of sanctions or serious consideration for sanctions and targeted asset bans and visa freezes. Now, the government's own majority, the government members, unanimously signed off on a report calling on the government to reconsider their decision, their refusal to act and to hold the Tatmadaw to account. So far, the Minister shamefully has failed to even respond to the report. She's had nothing to say. And so in closing, I do call out the Australian government in this regard that the slowness to act and the hesitation and the refusal to take real action sends all the wrong messages to you, to the brave activists inside the country, and indeed to the entire global community of people who say they support human rights. But it's not just good enough to say you support human rights. You actually need to act when it counts. So in closing, again, I thank you for the opportunity to share a few words. I believe that Australia, whilst we cannot, of course, determine the events that will unfold in Myanmar, it's ultimately going to be a matter for the people inside Myanmar. We can do more and play our part as a good global citizen to speak up for our values, universal values of human rights and democracy. So I applaud you on your activism, and I and the Australian Labor Party stand with you in this fight.
Thank you, Mr. Julian Hill, for coming here today and blessing us with your presence and speech.